So good morning, welcome everyone. My name is Jan Top and I'm very much honored to welcome you guys on behalf of the Netherlands Consulate General and the California Department of Water Resources. As I said, my name is Jan Top and I'm working for the Netherlands Consulate General in San Francisco. And the ambition of the Netherlands Consulate General in San Francisco is to stimulate exchange between the Netherlands and the US. We are located in San Francisco, and that means that we're trying to stimulate that exchange between the Netherlands and the west coast of the US. And we're doing that amongst governmental officials, amongst commercial officials, and amongst scientific officials. And actually today's webinar is a nice embodiment of the exchange we are envisioning. And we are very, very happy that we have been able to organize this together with the Department of Water Resources. And it's also very good to see many experts from the Department of Water Resources present today in this webinar. So very, very much welcome to you guys. And I also see people from the California Natural Resources Agency and as well the State Water Resources Control Board. I also see people operating on a more regional scale, such as the CEO from the largest public works agency in the US, Mark Pastrella, the LA Public Works. And I see experts from the Dutch Ministry of Water Management and Infrastructure. Warm welcome to you as well. And a lot of experts working with different companies and research institutes, consultant agencies, both from the Netherlands and the US. A warm welcome to you. And if I didn't mention you yet, feel very much welcome. Because this, we are very much happy to have like so many participants, and I'd like to ask you to engage with us later on in this webinar, during this webinar as well. But back to the exchange. As I said, we are stimulating exchange between the Netherlands and the United States, and in this case, the West Coast, California. And we believe we can very much learn from each other. And if I think of water-related issues, then I think, for example, of the very intricate and very efficient system California uses to transport water from the upper north to the lower south, which is more populated. And I believe Stephen Springhorn is going to elaborate a little bit on that during his presentation as well. I'm also thinking of the Dutch who pride themselves in knowing a lot about water-related issues. And that's actually true because a large part of the Netherlands is located below sea level. And because of that, the Dutch have had to identify and to formulate different approaches over the years to deal with the consequences from being located below sea level. At first, it was fighting against water. Later on, it became more mitigating, and that transitioned into adaptation strategies. However, it's not only about too much water but it's also about too little water. And that reminds me of a booklet, a report, an eponymous report written by some experts from the Netherlands as part of the Bay Area Resilient by Design Challenge. And they wrote some recommendations for a resilient Bay Area. As I said, we can learn a lot from each other, California and the Netherlands. And that was also corroborated and formalized by a letter of intent that was signed by the Lieutenant Governor of California, Ambassador Kounalakis, and the Dutch Vice Minister during last year's trade mission from the Netherlands to California. And in that letter of intent, it is stated that California and Netherlands should start and continue collaborating on different topics, such as the topic of water. And we, as the Netherlands Consulate General, we very much would like to be a link, a part to further shape that collaboration. And therefore, we were also planning on organizing a trip for California officials to the Netherlands to discuss about water-related issues. And that trip was actually planned for this week. We all know why we had to postpone this trip, but it's not canceled. But in the meantime, we are trying to keep the conversation going by means of virtual exchanges such as this webinar. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our moderator. His name is Christopher Jones, and he's from the California Department of Water Resources. And I'm very happy that he's willing to lead us through this webinar and to introduce himself and also to introduce the panelists we're having today. So Kris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan, and thanks for that introduction. As Jan mentioned, my name is Kris Jones, and I am an executive advisor working with the Department of Water Resources. And as Jan mentioned, I'll be serving as the moderator today. Before we get into our presentations, I'll just do a few brief introductions for our panel. We have two speakers, both from California and the Netherlands. So Stephen Springhorn on the California side has worked with the Department of Water Resources for more than 15 years on working on groundwater related issues. He's a supervising engineering geologist with the department. And more recently, he's been working to help support the implementation of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which is California's comprehensive groundwater management law that was just passed in September of 2014. On the Netherlands side, we have Roelof Stuurman. Roelof is a water specialist at Deltares in the Netherlands, and he's worked on groundwater related issues for more than 34 years. So a wealth of experience there as well. And so Roelof, or I guess for those of you who are unfamiliar with Deltares, it's an independent institute for applied research in the fields of water and subsurface in the Netherlands. And we'll be hearing a little bit more about that later. Also on the panel, we have Kathryn Roscoe, who is one of Roelof's colleagues at Deltares. She has more than 15 years of experience in flood risk management and hydrology. And she'll be introducing Roelof after Stephen's presentation and giving us a little bit more background on Deltares as well. So one of the other things, as Jan mentioned, we have quite an international audience today for this webinar. And so we thought it might be helpful just to, as I mentioned, we'll be introducing our organizations that are represented here on the panel. And as I mentioned, both Stephen and I work for the California Department of Water Resources, which is a department under the California Natural Resources Agency. And Stephen, I don't know if you could share your presentation. We have a few slides. So in terms of the Department of Water Resources mission, it's to sustainably manage the water resources of California in cooperation with other agencies to benefit the state's people and to protect, restore, and enhance the natural and human environments. And so we have quite a broad range of responsibilities for the Department of Water Resources. In terms of what we do, just going to the next slide, as I mentioned, we have a broad range of responsibilities. Most notably, water project for California. We generate a lot of clean hydropower, prepare for and manage flood and dam safety risks, restore and protect natural habitats, research and plan for climate change, and provide grants and technical assistance to local entities. And as Stephen will be pointing out and describing, more recently, we've had growing responsibility relating to groundwater management in California as well. We also have a heavy education component to our work, and also we conduct a lot of science and research to help our management and our policies makers have information that will make them better able to make data-driven decisions. And so that's just a quick introduction to the Department of Water Resources. One other thing to note, so as you have noticed, we're working with the Zoom platform for today's webinar. And if at any point during the presentations you have any questions, feel free to use the Q&A box that is provided at the bottom of the screen. And you can provide those questions at any time. Also, if there's any questions that you like and that you particularly are interested in hearing about, you can upvote your questions using the Zoom app. And then also, if there's a particular speaker that you'd like to direct your question towards, feel free to make note of that as well. So with that, I will hand it over to Stephen.
Well, thank you, Kris, and thank you, Jan. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending from a cool and rainy California, which is welcome news for our state since we've just gone through a dry winter and we're heading into a hot and dry summer months. And I'll explain why that's welcome news to have any rain we can get in this state of California. And I hope you are all well and staying safe and healthy, interesting times. And I, as Jan mentioned, agree that I'm glad we can connect virtually And I look forward to today's discussion and sharing ideas and continued coordination moving forward.
And Stephen, we might have missed your, it went off the sharing of the screen. I don't know if you might be able to try sharing it again. All part of the fun of working in these virtual webinars and meetings.
Yes. Let me try this again.
There it goes. There we go. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So thanks, Kris. For my part of the presentation, I'll be focusing on California's evolving ground management. As Kris mentioned, a little over 5 years ago now, we had a major shift in how groundwater is managed in the state of California to more comprehensive management. And again, we're looking forward to lessons learned from our counterparts in the Netherlands that have many more years of experience working through comprehensive management. Just get here. Okay, so this graphic and map, I think, sums it up pretty well. And this is not to, not in any way a competition of the size of our respective areas of work and where we live, but more to show the scale of and the tough road ahead of California in managing a state that is very large and has diverse interests. And so again, we're looking forward to learning from the Netherlands of what has worked in their area and their successful management of groundwater. So at the highest level, California's water resources, California is the largest water user in the United States of America. And that water use underpins the 5th largest economy in the world, a very diverse economy of many different demands on water resources. However, as I mentioned, we're new to comprehensive groundwater management, and we're the last Western state to regulate groundwater. So we have some catching up to do, but we're in good shape. We're moving forward quickly in the state of California. California, with its size, has some diverse or extreme conditions, and that is just a graphic of average annual precipitation. Highlights these extremes in hydrology that are matched with the geology and landforms of the state, to where in the northwestern part of California, it receives over 150 inches or 4,000 millimeters of precipitation in a spring forest with beautiful redwood trees, to the extreme other side of the state where there's one of the best parts of North America in Death Valley, where it receives just 2 inches or 50 millimeters of precipitation every year. So that just shows the range in hydrology and the need for management. And I'll get to this move will live and where the demand is. And just a fact on that, Sacramento, where I'm presenting this morning, north of Sacramento, about 75% of the water originates north of Sacramento. However, about 80% of the demand in the state is in the southern 2/3. So because of that disparity, the state of California, over many decades with the government and local governments, has built in a sophisticated system of reservoirs, flood management or flood conveyance, and water conveyance systems throughout California to move the water from where it flows to where people are using it, and to grow different crops throughout the state and to the people that live throughout the state. Just to highlight where some of California's groundwater is used, or more of the water in general, it can be broken into 3 major categories of use, where environmental uses make up about 50% of the total average water use. And a lot of that use comes from that northwestern part of California, where there's substantial rainfall, large flows in the rivers in that area. The second major use in California is agriculture. That makes up about 40% of the average supply or use to irrigate almost 8 million acres of farmland across the state, which produces about $50 billion of agricultural output. And then finally, the urban use, which makes up about 10% of the total water use on average in the state of California, to provide water to the 40 million Californians that live in this state, that cover almost 5 million urban acres. So the map on the left there just shows in green where the irrigated agriculture is in the state of California, and then the purple shows where the urban areas are. And you can see that the majority of the large urban areas, like the picture shown of Los Angeles, California, is in the southern part of the state. And then the Central Valley is a tremendous cultural area, as well as urban centers throughout the Central Valley. So now focusing on California's groundwater use. In an average year, 40% of the entire state's supply comes from groundwater. And then that increases substantially during drought years to almost 60% of the state's water supply comes from groundwater in those times of limited surface water. And in general, 85% of Californians rely some way on groundwater. And because of that reliance in drought years, groundwater is a very important and critical drought buffer and adaptation strategy to climate change. And that's something that we're focused here in the state of California, is on climate resiliency and water. And those are very linked. So the chart here on the lower right shows from about the early 2000s to 2016, the groundwater used. And you can see those fluctuations in groundwater use in the state, averaging or topping out over 20 million acre feet uses of groundwater. So the green line is where those is agricultural use, and you can see during droughts, groundwater pumping goes up in the agricultural areas. And then the purple line is the urban groundwater use. And that has seen a steady declining trend, even within the tail end of the last drought in California. And that's in large part by widespread conservation measures that our colleagues at our sister agency, the State Water Resource Control Board, have been implementing, and have been seeing results in the last drought and continuing on today, because water is so precious in the state of California. So just a quick look at California's infrastructure for surface water. As I mentioned, this elaborate and sophisticated series of conveyance and canals and reservoirs. There's a picture of the State Water Project's key reservoir, the Lake Oroville, in the northern part of the state. And then to compare or contrast that with the state's natural infrastructure and the over 500 groundwater basins that store a tremendous amount of water and that are extracted using hundreds of thousands of agricultural and urban and other wells in the. And to put that into perspective, California has about 50 million acre feet of built reservoir capacity, and that surface water system has been regulated for over 100 years. And if you compare that to groundwater basin capacity, we're in just over year 5 of comprehensive regulation for a resource that is an order of magnitude or more in amount of storage capacity. But there's a big error or range of uncertainty because we are early in our understanding of the full resource and how to use that resource sustainably. So it looks like we might have a little bit of technical difficulty. Chris, can you still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you. Just don't see you, but feel free. Don't worry about it. We can. We hear you, so that's good.
Okay, so I'm getting an error saying that the host has stopped video share.
Oh, okay.
So.
Well, we can. I think Isa will be able to maybe help with that in the background, and then we can just move forward. We can still hear you, so that seems like that. Oh, we see you again.
There we go. Okay, great. All right. And so just one final point on the groundwater storage capacity, although that's vast, not all that water can be used because if it was, there would be significant impacts of that use. But there is a lot of storage capacity in the groundwater basins in the state. So now moving to how California's groundwater is managed or governed. And there's different tiers of management. Although the theme of California groundwater management is more decentralized, or as it's stated out in California, local control and authority. And so this just shows the different tiers, the primary federal, state, and local agencies that are working to manage the state's vast water resources. So level with the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, which is more of a science and data-driven organization, provides a lot of information. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation that manages the large federally operated water project in the state. And then you moving down to the state level of governance, the Department of Water Resources that Kris and I work for, our sister agency, the State Water Resources Control Board, which I think their groundwater team is on the line today as well, and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife that works on environmental aspects of groundwater as well. And then getting to the local dynamic or local governance structure, and there are hundreds of local water agencies, over 450, and of those, there's actually over 2 new what are called groundwater sustainability agencies with enhanced powers and authorities to manage their local groundwater and water resources in general. So highly connected, but highly decentralized, where local management is a key emphasis in the state here. So talking about the shift between post and pre groundwater management, where we are with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, what really led to that is a very intense drought that happened from 2011 to 2016, and an ongoing, what you could call groundwater drought that even predated that surface water drought because of the increasing reliance on groundwater over the many years. And so this map on the left just shows a trend in groundwater levels throughout the state of California. And you can see that approximately 65%, and it's in some areas, it's more intense as far as the levels of decline in groundwater. But there has been substantial declines in groundwater as there's been an increase in reliance on groundwater, and as we've had recent droughts or 2 droughts in that time period of this analysis. And with increasing reliance on groundwater, there were impacts that were occurring from land subsidence and other impacts, and that's really what led to the shift in from more, as we'll look at, reactive groundwater management to more proactive groundwater management with the SGMA, or the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So prior to SGMA, as we call it, groundwater management was voluntary, more localized, even more so than today, service area planning, variable levels of implementation, and variable authority for those to make some of the tough decisions that they have to make to balance their groundwater basins with recharge and pumping. And then it was more incentive with grants if planning was done. And you can see the timeline is related to droughts and floods in the state of California. And when I mean reactive is the fact that after each major drought, there was a piece of significant groundwater legislation. And that's no different when SGMA came along because of the impacts that it created. So from reactive management to more proactive management moving forward with SGMA, it goes to required groundwater management. There's a new regulatory framework that has been established. It puts an emphasis on the entire basin being planned for and to reach sustainability. It requires implementation and tracking and metrics. And it, as I mentioned, provides new groundwater authorities powers and authorities to the groundwater agencies. And then there is a piece of state intervention if needed, and our colleagues at the State Water Resources Control Board handle that state intervention in coordination and consultation with water resources. So where does SGMA apply? Just a quick sense. These are the 515 groundwater basins in the state. There are a fewer number than 500, around 100 or so, where the majority of the people and pumping occurs in the state in orange and yellow. And then there's yet another group of basins, what are called critically overdrafted. Most of those are in the San Joaquin Valley, within the Central Valley of the state. Those make up the majority of the groundwater pumping, and those areas were required to develop a sustainability plan for groundwater resources before the rest. So SGMA in a quick highlight or high level, again, I mentioned local control, and there's an emphasis from the very beginning of this law about the locals. Groundwater management is best accomplished locally, but that is within a framework that's established by the state, both the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Resources Control Board. And then those local agencies have the lion's share of responsibility and authority to get their basins into balance and sustainability. The key performance metrics within SGMA are these what are called 6 undesirable results. And these are the key metrics that the locals are planning for, that the framework has been set up around, and it's really to avoid these 6 undesirable results from happening within 20 years and then continuing sustainability or the avoidance of these 6 conditions moving forward. So again, lowering of groundwater levels, reduction of storage, land subsidence, and other related impacts to groundwater pumping. So the timeline of SGMA, the first step was back in 2017 for the local agencies to form. As I mentioned, over 200 formed. Right now, there has been a first set that have been submitted to the state for review to make sure that they're reasonable and have a path to sustainability. There's also another set that is still being developed, and that's shown on the map here. And then once all those plans are in, there's 20 years for them to be implemented through an adaptive management cycle and to achieve sustainability by 2040 or 2042. So that SGMA is a long-term planning and sustainability process in the state of California, and we're in the relatively early days of that process. So now I'd like to shift and just have a few more slides to highlight some of the areas that we're focusing on and using new technology and innovations to better understand in an effort to better manage the groundwater basins in the state. And the first one is subsidence monitoring. As I mentioned, with pumping in excess of recharge, that leads to overdraft, and which can lead to land subsidence. The state over the last few years has emphasized and invested in statewide data products, such as what's shown on the screen here, which is INSAR or satellite-based radar data that we have time series information for all these places on the map where you can see monthly displacement of the land surface in order to understand where issues are cropping up and to help better manage them. And so a particular interest of this monitoring network is near critical infrastructure like canals, roads, bridges, and other infrastructure in the state. And our goal, as always in the state, is to make data publicly available for all to use and the locals and other entities to use in their management. We have a team working on moving advanced geophysics forward in the state. There was an investment, some funding mechanisms to have to start a program to better understand and characterize the various groundwater basins in the state using aerial geophysics. helicopter-based electromagnetic geophysics to be exact. But this really, again, helps us to see into the subsurface as best we can to get some more insights into what materials are there and then how to best manage those basins and put that information in the hands of the locals and the state to move the understanding forward. And then the last thing to highlight is another team within our group and coordinated with federal and local agencies is a surface water, groundwater modeling team and effort that has invested has over many years, but really redoubled the effort to have a Central Valley wide sophisticated numerical model that the various components of this, the leader of this project just yesterday. And one thing to highlight is the fact that the land use and water use, which we know are connected in the state, can be this model can be used for that. And just this chart on the screen shows the change in land use, particularly permanent crops, which has been a major change in agricultural areas in the state, has increased substantially from the early 90s to today. So these are just some of the tools that we're working on in California. And then just moving forward on points of coordination, and I look forward to this discussion today and in the future. But some of the areas that are really come to mind are, again, focusing on groundwater management and resiliency, what the Netherlands have done that's been successful, where challenges or solutions they've created or come up with to meet those challenges. Another emphasis is basin characterization, those geophysics, modeling, monitoring, and data management to make sure all that information is publicly available. So with that, I'll stop and then we can transition to the next part of the presentation. And thank you.
Great, thank you, Stephen. All right. Well, we have maybe time for one question. I don't know if Kathryn, if you have a question that you might have, or Roelof for Stephen before we launch into your presentation. I'm just looking. Oh, did you have a question, Roelof? Well, unmute Roelof if we have a.
Okay. Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Yeah, we can hear you.
I was curious, how are the boundary of the basins, the groundwater basins, determined? Because are they don't interacting?
Yes, very good question. And that's been a focus of a lot of emphasis going into the implementation of SGMA. So those groundwater have been developed over several decades, dating back all the way to the 1950s. And they're initially based on the outer boundaries or based on scientific information or hydrogeologic information that determine where alluvial or sediments that contain groundwater, significant quantities of groundwater versus the bedrock or more hard rock areas of the state. But then within those bigger basins, there is what are called subbasins that are determined on jurisdictional lines like county lines or city limit lines, hydrologic lines like rivers. So it really depends on that, but there at those internal lines and even between basin and what we call non-basin areas, there is communication and continuity between those lines. And so that is another challenging aspect of groundwater management in California, is the fact that from one quote unquote basin to another, there's going to be technical coordination and additional coordination needed to plans that are adjacent to each other. So that's a great question, Roelof.
At the beginning, you were mentioning that the environmental water use was 50%. What is environmental water use?
Yeah, and that's really, it comes down to in-stream flows. So the water that just naturally runs off or runs through the watersheds and out to the ocean in California. It also relates to manage wetland areas in the state of California. There's a number of those across the state, mostly in the Central Valley.
So 50% is not arriving in the ocean of the surface water.
Yeah, well, there's even with agricultural use, there is some return flows that go back in. So yeah, there is some of that. Yeah.
All right, just being mindful of time. So it looks like we are getting some questions in the Q&A using Zoom. We just, for the audience, we do have about a half an hour chunk at the end that we'll be devoting to going through your questions. So just being mindful of time so that Roelof has time to speak. I'll hand it over to Kathryn for his introduction, and then we'll hand it over to Roelof to be able to give his presentation as well.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Great. Well, it's really great to be here. My name is Kathryn Roscoe. I work as a flood risk and adaptation specialist at Deltares, and I'm also the regional coordinator for the US and Canada. I wanted to just take a moment and actually not introduce Roelof. I'll let him introduce himself, but I did want to introduce Deltares. Yeah, Kris did that a little bit, but I thought for those of you who may not be familiar with Deltares, I can just take a minute and tell a little bit about who we are. So Deltares is an independent, not-for-profit applied research institute of about 800 people focusing on a range of topics related to water, subsurface, climate resilience, and risk. Deltares provides expert consultancy advice, but we also have a unique relationship with the Dutch government. Sorry, just a moment. And can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry, I had an interruption. We have a unique relationship with the Dutch government in which we provide broad technical expertise to support many different policy decisions. We also work closely with universities and other research institutes to develop new knowledge and tools to support climate adaptation and resilience. We develop software you may have heard of like Delta3D, and our forecasting software Fuse, which is used in the US by the National Weather Service. We follow what we call a dare to share policy, which means that we provide the software that we develop without license fees. This is part of our commitment to knowledge dissemination. I'm really sorry, I keep getting interrupted. We do this as part of our commitment to knowledge dissemination and collaboration, which we feel is needed to solve big challenges. Deltares also houses experimental facilities for research, including our Delta flume, which you see a picture of there with some willows in it, and it can generate waves up to 4.5 meters high. Deltares is founded in the Netherlands. Our head office is in Delft, but we also have a Deltares USA office in Washington, DC, and we also have local presence in the Bay Area, which facilitates a collaboration that we have with the USGS. So I hope that gives a little bit of an overview of the different kinds of work that we do and who we are. And then I will turn it over to Roelof to introduce himself and talk about groundwater in the Netherlands.
All right, over to you, Roelof.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathryn.
So a little bit the same topic, operational groundwater management in the Netherlands. I have a table of contents. I want to tell something about governance, examples of instruments we are using, about our hydrogeological mapping, our national groundwater model, about our experience with groundwater monitoring, and some topics about groundwater characterization. This is my introduction. I'm a senior, and I'm also a grandfather. That is my daughter and grandchildren. That is my house at the right. I live 5 meters below sea level. I work in New Orleans, and I always tell them that I sleep very well because everything is very protected. In my neighborhood, I live near Amsterdam. There is a booklet next to it. I collect everything what is going wrong in groundwater and hydrogeology in all the projects, because I believe that we can learn more from that. There at the left, I'm with the king. The king 20 years ago was a prince, and at that time he became a water management, and I became more serious for friends and family. I work also in Indonesia and in India. I work at a very small scale in nature areas to restore wetlands. I also in urban area to protect wooden piles. I also work at a large scale to understand the impact of lignite mining in Germany on the Dutch groundwater situation. And I believe that you have to understand all scales and the connection between the scales. An introduction about the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we have precipitation surplus. We have every year groundwater recharge of about 300 millimeters, 250 millimeters. We are lucky. The last 100 years, rain was increasing. In 100 years ago, it was about 700 millimeters, and now it is 850 millimeters. And evaporation was not increasing in the same amount as rain. We have a low part of the Netherlands, as you can see at the left. And we have a higher part, that's the sandy area. And below you see a typical cross-section. At the left is the dune area, sand. Then we have the polder area, green is clay, and purple is peat. And you can, this is, I used the public database, and you can just make this cross-section very easily. What you have to know is a little bit about our paleogeography, that 7,000 years ago, the western part of the Netherlands was marine wetlands. And so that had an impact, of course, on the groundwater quality. But 100 years after Christ, nearly the whole of the Netherlands had peat at the surface. And of course, that is a freshwater situation. And remember those maps. I have also here, red is infiltration, blue is exfiltration, groundwater discharge. We have infiltrating hills, ice-pushed hills, glacial hills, and nearby the groundwater is coming at surface in the streams, creeks, etc. The rivers are draining in the southern part and in the eastern part, but infiltrating, losing water in the Holocene, in the polder part. We have a lot of, like you have, many problems with subsidence, but another type of subsidence. Most of our subsidence is caused by drainage, shallow drainage. We call it shallow subsidence. In the northeastern part, you see there is a lot of subsidence. That is because of gas mining. And we have serious problems there now also because the gas mining caused earthquakes. And now it is €1 billion of billions of damage. We have also, and that's the map in the subsidence map, every city get money from the government, from the national government to fight subsidence, or to have, they have extra costs, damage costs, for example, pipes and cables. And when you have more soft soil in your city, you get more money from the national government. At the right, you see the fresh salt distribution, and you can see that is in correlation with the map I was showing before. We have a lot of groundwater, but we can only use a little bit of the groundwater. We have and that is, of course, you can nearly only use what is infiltrating in the aquifers. but you have to divide that by agriculture, but also drinking water supply, industry, and nature. This is what I was telling. We like modeling. My colleagues like more than I do. I like more the field, but this is very interesting because he was modeling in time from the Holocene. And now you see the dune development in the Holocene, creating freshwater bodies. The whole area at the east of it is salinicized because of the flooding. And at the right, you see the glacial hills. The glacial hills creating a large body of fresh water. And in time, now you see, this is the period that the peat developed between the glacial hills and the dunes, and you get one beautiful big fresh water body, what we are going to lose afterwards. We have to wait for that. At the right, you can see what is the origin of the water. Is it rainwater or is it seawater or transgression water? And we are nearly at the Roman time. Yeah, we are at the Roman time, and that is starting the period that we were using the peat, creating lakes, and the whole water system in the western part of the Netherlands changed. We were creating polders, and because of that, we had upconing of salt water in the polder areas, and we lost the fresh water in the western part. So all the great cities like Rotterdam, Amsterdam are depending on dune water. And that we have to protect. I will tell you later. And everywhere in the Netherlands, I don't know it is in California, we have fresh water on salt water, also in the eastern part. All our geological deposits are mainly from marine deposits. And so everywhere in the Netherlands, we have danger for salinization. About governance. How are we organized? I was already telling you, our groundwater milestones are, of course, this peat mining in the past, creating lakes, and after we transformed the lakes into polders. This changed the groundwater system dramatically. In 1924, we had a Land Act for redistribution of land, improving agriculture. And at the right, you can see that was incredible, many kilometers of the Netherlands had the map. Nearly the whole of the Netherlands is reclaimed. And that is meaning that we were introduced many drains, many canals, and also changed the water system. In 1925, Marshall help from you was helping us to understand more of the landscape. And for that, we were installing 22,000 shallow observation wells in the Netherlands, every square kilometer. And we use that. The National Institute for Drinking Water Supply started in 1950, and that changed also. Before, every city has its drinking water company, that in time we brought them together and put them on safe places to have a good quality. 1976, we had a famous drought, and farmers started to discover groundwater as an alternative for irrigation. So at that time, the groundwater using by agriculture was incredible. In 1985, 1989, we started, or the government started to recognize that water quality, ecology, is also part of the water system. And that was really make a big change in the system. And 2000, the European Water Framework, and in 1991, the Nitrate Directive started. And that was a great input also, because of course, before we tried to escape for the nitrate problems, but now we have to tell Europe that it is not, that it is improving. The European Water Frame Directive, something, for example, about the quantitative status, we have to prove that our groundwater volume is not increasing at Brussels. Every 6 years we have to make a report. We have the same to do with pollutants. So I think that is a great thing. At a national, we have a European level, we have a national level, we have a provincial level, and it is in this diagram what is doing who. But at the right, it is like everywhere. It is all stakeholders are incorporated: nature, land use, agriculture, urban, and together we make the plans. But of course, the government decides. The small governments, for example, municipalities are arranging groundwater in the city. That was only 10 years ago starting, and they are responsible for groundwater care. So when you have problems in a city related to groundwater, you can go to the desk from the city and they need to help. But it is not telling that they are paying to solve your problem. About drinking water supply. This was the first, the start of the first drinking water supply, a stream in the Dune area. And after the cholera epidemic, they started to construct a steel pipe to Amsterdam and bringing this water there to drink there. And these are the drinking companies. In the left down, you can see we had in 1930 more than 200 drinking water companies, and now we have 10. And so that is more organized. You can guarantee the quality, etc. I show you the price. That the price is for 1,000 liter is at about €1.50. So $1.80, $1.8. You can see that the drinking water production was increasing, but around 1990 it stabilized, and I will tell you why. At the right, you can see the divide. Later, you can have this presentation and read that. Important is that also we constructed water transport from the river into the Dune area. The Dune area is important for all the western part of the Netherlands, and because of over pumping, we had salinization of Dune water, and we need to start in 1957 to bring river water to the dunes. We have large infiltration systems in the Dune area, and we also use that for Tata Steel, industrial process water. So the network is more than 300 kilometers. We transport 155 million cube, and the costs are about 30 million. Some example of management instruments. This is the longest slide. That taxes are helping. We had a national groundwater tax, but this was abolished in 2012 after political pressure, and I think this is a mistake. Because this was helping to reduce farmers to use more water, because we have not enough. We have still a groundwater levy, and that is a more small amount, but this is mostly spent for projects to restore the groundwater situation. The best was wastewater levy. Industry had to pay, they had to pay for groundwater tax, but they had also to pay for the discharge of their used water. And that was most time more than the groundwater tax. We have a campaign to reduce drinking water, so that is about 30 gallons now. So I think it can even become less. And drinking water companies have opportunities little opportunities, because we have not that much groundwater anymore. We have enough, but it is already used. We have permitting for agriculture extractions. we can prohibit it to irrigate meadows before June 1st. At this moment, we have this week we have a drought. There is already prohibited in many areas in the Netherlands to use groundwater and surface water for irrigation. Now, for industry, the campaign was very successful. That really reduced the use of that water. For new project initiatives, we have the water assessment tool. That is written here. When you start a new project, you start to construct an urban area, but also, for example, an agriculture project. We have a process that the initiator is and the water managers are coming together. And so they have to discuss what is the impact, and later they have the obligation to tell what they were doing with it. And the starting point is water neutral development. As surface water will not increase, storm drainage, groundwater use recharge will not decrease. This is, like everywhere in the world, a very important principle. Try to collect, use, infiltrate, and store rainwater where it falls. Try to create local storage areas for the remaining flow, and only when it is really not possible, discharge what you cannot store. And this is, of course, the key for a lot of problems. We have a drought ladder. In the Netherlands, the government decides during a drought what needs to happen. So, for example, here is written, of course, our flood defense. Our flood defense is also vulnerable for drought. So when sometimes we need to irrigate our flood defense, and that is the most important part. Also, nature dependent on soil conditions is more important than drinking water supply and power supply. So in this way, this was a long negotiation. We handle drought. Determine the carrying capacity. This is a new project, and you have to know a little bit how our system is. This is in the Pleistocene sandy area. You have infiltration area. You have groundwater discharge areas. The groundwater discharge area are the brook valleys. They are very important for nature. In between are the agriculture area. Their groundwater is polluted, but because of this flow system in the nature areas, most times when there is still a lot of groundwater discharge, the groundwater quality is very good. And it is about, in this area that's in the south of the Netherlands, you can see industrial water decreased, drinking water stabilized in time, but we have a lot of rain minus evaporation, but the drainage is also a lot. So we have only 197 cubic million cube aquifer recharge. And already the drinking water company is using 200. The agriculture is using 40 in a normal year. When you have a drought year, the drinking water company is using a little bit more than 200, but agriculture 100. So you see we have a problem, because how nature wants also to have money, and we're already making some calculations, and we believe that nature needs at least 100 million cube also. Oh, he is not working. I also showed two flowers that we have rainwater dependent nature, that is acid, and groundwater discharge dependent nature, and that are the yellow flowers. My presentation is not working. Hello?
Yeah, are you, so Roelof, are you able to move your slide?
No, I'm trying.
Oh, okay.
Oh, wait, the host has asked you to start your, oh, that happened, but.
No worries.
Yeah, but, no, it's still not.
Let's see.
Stop share. Yeah. Oh, okay.
And Roelof, they maybe turned off your video to improve the connection. So that may be why your video went off.
Now now it's working or not?
It's working. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. What we also determined in the Netherlands, and that is something for the future, we determined area of national groundwater reserves. At the right, you see a cross section. You have often, you have polluted water, then you have influence water, and then you have pristine water. We call it in Dutch zuiver. And we want to protect that water for future. And so, for example, we want companies that we have no deep geothermal boreholes passing this very pristine water. We want to save that for our children. We have a national subsidence program and just started, and we want to understand more, model more, and try to slow down the subsidence velocity. Mapping, this is done by TNO, the Geological Survey of the Netherlands, and what we always use for our groundwater models. There are two ways of modeling of geology, of hydrogeology. That is the layer models, and you have the voxel models. The voxel models are often 40 meters deep and 100 by 100 meter by half a meter, and we determine lithology. And I'm also using this now in New Orleans to construct a voxel model for New Orleans. The national model, like you, we have a national model started in 2006, one national for all the Netherlands. We use a moisture, unsaturated zone model, a metaswap. We use the groundwater model, ModFlow. Mozart is a surface water, and DM also. DM is the big waterways. And they're all connected. And in that way, we calculate delta scenarios, 2050, change in groundwater based on several climate change and socio-economic forecasts. And you see two examples. One, tranquility, little climate change and limited economic growth at the left. And at the right, steam, strong climate change and strong economic growth. And you see we have we will get more groundwater in the high areas, in the dune areas and the glacial hills, because in winters we have more rain in future. We are also adding water quality to these models, and we are adding fresh salt to these models. And the experience is that it is a great use in the Netherlands. It is all free. Also, the model is free to use. We are creating many extra toolbox, and it created a lot of collaboration between governments, knowledge institutes, and consultants. Groundwater monitoring. We have national level modeling, province, cities, water board, drinking water, nature, private companies, and yeah, you can read it. We have incredible many groundwater modeling sites, very organized. And for example, we have a primary groundwater monitoring that is created in the 70s by statistics. And so in this way, we can determine the groundwater heads, hydraulic heads in the whole of the Netherlands. And all the things are public available. This is our groundwater quality monitoring networks. We have 800 locations also all around the Netherlands, 25 meters deep. They are based on land use and lithology and recharge or discharge. And every year there is a report. I just started with groundwater monitoring networks for our highways. because they are so vulnerable now for climate change, too much water or too low water. So we want to monitor if the highways are at risk. All the data are going in a central database in the Netherlands. And now it is also a new database that is the BRO, as is written. And all government agencies are obliged to deliver new data to that database. So this database will growing very fast. Of course, also public awareness in monitoring is important. We have some innovative things. We are at our Deltares Institute, we are monitoring microbiological corrosion. And that is, so we are monitoring water quality and bacteria in the soil. We have our nitrate app, is also used in California. So you measure nitrate and it is sent to the website immediately. We are, together with TNO, sampling gases, because we use that for dating, and we use that for the interpretation of our groundwater quality measurements. And we have a slim flex because we have many observation wells in the Netherlands, but a normal EM sensor couldn't pass. So we have made one flexible fine one, and we can make very great measurement in existing PVC observation wells. Groundwater characterization, I skipped this.
Yeah, and
this is the same.
We have about, it's a little over the 20 minutes, about 26
Yeah,
minutes.
so for that I was skipping this. I'm nearly at the end. Yeah, this is the same as you do at our, and I think this is important because also in the Netherlands is the challenge to use surplus water to fight droughts. So artificial infiltration will be the thing where we have to work in future. Capture and store more winter water, which is growing for summer use. Drastic improvement of water, wastewater treatment, and infiltrate and reuse. So we have enough water, but we have to deal that. And to support that, all those calculations, we have our ModFlow model at different cells, and we try to design the solution for this storage. And I believe that groundwater management in the Netherlands is best accomplished at a regional groundwater flow system scale, with a little bit of help from the European community. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Roelof. All right, well, yeah, thank you, Roelof and Stephen, for your presentations. Now we'll transition to the Q&A portion of the webinar. We have about 20 minutes before the end of the time, so we'll try to kind of go through our questions that we've received during the Q&A or the Q&A app. Looks like we've gotten a few. So let's see, I'm just opening up that now. So one of the, let's see, just starting off with the top question. Besides the risk of subsidence and overexploitation of freshwater reservoirs, future scarcity, is it possible that increasing groundwater use might affect the current natural water cycle and cause changes in the weather or sea level? That question, I guess, is for either of the speakers. So Roelof or Stephen, I'll let you decide if that's and if you need the question repeated, feel free to let me know.
I can answer it with the help of a friend. And a friend is from University of Utrecht, and he works also at Deltares. He is here. And he told me he has a written article in Environmental Research Letter. And he explained that, yes, of course, because of irrigation, you get more evapotranspiration. And because of that, you get more rain. But 70% of that rain is falling in the sea. And only the other part is falling on land, but also into streams. And yes, in that way, it is even, he's telling that the sea level is rising because of that with 0.4 millimeters a year. And he's also taking that when you have a dropping groundwater level, you have lower soil moisture, creating less evapotranspirating, creating more longer heat and drought periods.
All right, thank you, Roelof. Just another question that came in. So what kind of management tools are transferable from the US to the Netherlands and vice versa? So, what are some of the things that we can learn from one another, just, in terms of how we've managed groundwater, some of the tools that we're using to be able to address those challenges? That question's for, I guess, both Roelof and for Stephen.
Will I answer first?
Sure, or Stephen, if you're Stephen.
Yeah, I worked 2 years in the California basin, in the San Francisco basin, and I was always telling you cannot manage what you don't know, and so what I would like to transfer is monitoring and monitoring networks. That it was very difficult to find data. You could find some data at this location, some at that location, but it was not really designed in a way that the water system works. And so I think that is, for my feeling, an important thing.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is Stephen. Roelof hit it on the head as far as the monitoring is needed for management, and so I fully agree with that. And then another thing that came to mind is the artificial recharge, or more of the management actions that the Netherlands have taken or continue to take. I think that can transfer to California, as we are likely going to be seeing more recharge activities under this new law. And then the other thing that comes to mind is the drought planning or drought management, with some of the policy aspects of how you're managing drought in the Netherlands. So those are just a few that come to mind.
Great, thank you, Stephen. All right, it looks like people are using the upvoting option. There's one that was rose to the top. Can any speaker give a practical example of water management cooperation between Netherlands and California? So I guess kind of along those veins of like, what are some potential opportunities that we could see moving forward where we might be able to coordinate or cooperate moving forward? And this is open to both speakers. Stephen, maybe starting off with you.
Sure. Yes, I think just touching on the prior comments and answer to the last question is the data management. I think that's a fundamental piece of the groundwater puzzle here in California, and it sounds like in the Netherlands. So just lessons learned on how you've developed your standardized and nationwide groundwater or just data infrastructure. There has been some recent work over the last few years here in California on open and transparent water data. And that's a big investment that's been going on, and it has been showing success with trying to, Roelof, as you mentioned, make it easier to find data in order to answer some of these tough questions that are in front of the locals and the state. Then the other practical applications, I think, it starts with the geophysics, but how those geophysics are integrated into those models, the flow models. I think that's an area that we're going to be ramping up here in California quite a bit with those new surveys that will be done for basin characterization, and how that information can be interpreted and then ultimately used to inform management decisions or policy. So I see those are sort of two highlight ones.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Yeah.
Yeah, Roelof, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think, we are both interested in this mapping of fresh salt transition zones with the helicopters, for example. So I think that is, of course, a very interesting topic to work together. What we can learn from each other. We are using this data from the helicopter, and then we are using this mapping of the lithology of the subsurface for a long time, and we want to bring them together in modeling, and that we are trying to do. And another thing, what I think we can cooperate is subsidence. We have in Holland this shallow subsidence, but we have not really studied deeper subsidence. And I think California is the king in measuring subsidence using extentiometers and things like that. And we are just starting to use extentiometers. And so that is also, we learned that you can tell us a lot about that.
Yeah, and just one thing to add there on that topic, on subsidence, the state has been, as you mentioned, investing in historically and then more recently on different types of monitoring infrastructure for subsidence. And we've been working with our federal counterparts at the U.S. Geological Survey, and that's another group that has a wealth of knowledge, particularly on land subsidence in California. So I think that's another opportunity to bring in some additional groups and perspectives to the discussion.
Yeah, and I also think shallow subsidence is not what I call shallow subsidence by drainage. We are focusing on that to understand shallow subsidence. It is not only by measuring, but understanding the processes. And I think shallow subsidence is also happening all around the Bay Area, for example. All the areas where you have reclaimed former marshes. So I think also in that field, we could cooperate.
Yeah, and just to highlight another thing related to that, Roelof, would be in the Delta region of California, there are many islands and levees, and that shallow subsidence plays a very important role, or just a management necessity to help manage the subsidence and help reverse it in any way there can be. So yeah, I agree. So more on the surface water or flood management and water conveyance side, I think that is an important area of coordination as well.
Yeah, that is this focus of this new program in the Netherlands. That is typical, that type of subsidence. That you have those delta polders you have.
Mm-hmm.
And just being mindful of time, we have only about 10 minutes left before the end. So we have maybe a chance for maybe one or two questions. There's, let's see, one of the questions that rose to the top, I'll just read it. Remember Stephen's graph on agriculture versus groundwater use and Roelof's agricultural use figures. Both California and the Netherlands are doing a great job at the supply side, but we need to do more on the demand side if we want to preserve this precious resource. So that's kind of a more of a comment, but if you guys, either Roelof or Stephen have any comments to that, I guess maybe looking to, kind of addressing that question, but then also what we might want to do on the demand side, or what kind of challenges we have moving forward to deal with that kind of question. Maybe start off with Stephen.
Yeah, thank you, Kris. Yeah, and that is a very important question, and really at the heart of what this new Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is centered on. And it really relates to how these many local agencies within this new statewide framework are going to come up with a portfolio of projects and actions necessary to bring their basins into balance. And when I mean balance, it means the definition of sustainability is defined by the beneficial uses and users of the groundwater and surface water in those basins. And so, it's not only agricultural interests, it's other interests in the state or in those basins that are at the table and providing comments to those plans. So there's a whole portfolio of projects in these plans that we'll be reviewing at the state such as the supply augmentation that's been mentioned, but also demand reduction. And those are really the two major knobs, obviously, that can be turned to bring basins back into balance. And so there's a lot of innovative thinking here in California of how to do that. In water markets is one emerging field, and then other areas are innovative ways to use agricultural or working landscapes to recharge water and making sure that it gets down into the actual aquifer area or the aquifer zone. But so those are just some of the considerations on that. But definitely the demand side or demand reduction side is on the table in this new law and being coordinated and thought about tremendously.
Great, thank you, Stuurman. And Roelof, I guess on the Netherlands side.
Yeah, I was showing you that we were already for decades fighting this demand, and for example, and it was successful for the drinking water supply. When we use 3 times less drinking water than you use in California, but because the weather is hotter, so you need more. But I think at this moment, it will be difficult for the drinking water supply. But they need new water, so they need alternatives. So they're looking for infiltration of river water and use that, for example. But agriculture, like I think in the California, that is really very difficult. Now, the drinking water supply in the southern Netherlands is using 200 million in 1 year, but the agriculture, 100 million in 10 weeks, when it is a dry period. And they need that. And so how you solve that problem? And I think, yes, we had to think about new system. I think that we had, like in the Bay Area, reuse treated wastewater. And so we need to treat wastewater much better. And in that way that you can use it in agriculture or for things like that. But because there is not arriving another source. And you have to manage extremes. I call it harvest extremes. And now during rainfall, all the water is going into the sea. Can we bring that somewhere? But that will, water use in agriculture, and of course, in Holland, we're always telling you need other type of agriculture that is not using a lot of water. And that is also a solution.
Thank you, Roelof. Yeah, and just thank you to both of the speakers today. We'll give a virtual round of applause. I'm sure all the people on the Zoom are applauding as well. We have a few more minutes left, so I'll just close by saying, again, thank you to all the panel members and for the speakers for presenting today. We got a lot of questions that we didn't get to. And this is what we're viewing this as a beginning of a conversation for the coordination and collaboration between our 2 regions. And so as Jan will talk about just in a second, what we're hoping to do is to try to schedule some sort of follow-up discussion as well, just to pursue some of these collaborative opportunities that we just touched upon today, just because of limited time. But thank you again to the panel, and I'll hand it over to Jan, and we can kind of discuss some of the kind of next steps.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christopher, for moderating the panel and leading us through this webinar. It was very informative, and I very much liked it. And you're right, we could have gone on talking way longer because there are still many more questions. So I definitely would like to facilitate the ongoing discussion. So if you have any questions or if you would like to be part of further discussions, please send us an email. And with regard to that, tomorrow morning, you guys, all the participants, will receive the recording of this particular webinar by means of a follow-up email. And in the follow-up email, you will also see our contact details. So as I said, if you would like to be part of the discussion and also be part of like future initiatives, please send us an email, and then we can include you in the list of participants we're gonna keep updated about the initiatives we are working on. yeah, as I think that's basically what I wanted to say. And big shout out to you, but also to the 3 different panelists we had. Stephen Springhorn from the DWR, Roelof Stuurman from Deltares, and Kathryn Roscoe from Deltares as well. Very informative and very happy to be able, to listen to them, and that we were able to collaborate on creating this webinar. So this is the end of the entire webinar, and we'll keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.